That is a cool video, isn't it? Really shows you God's creation. And there's nothing about a caterpillar that makes you think it's going to be a butterfly, right? I mean, caterpillars are slow and they're slimy and they're ugly. I mean, some caterpillars have cool sweaters. I mean, they have cool colors, but for the most part, caterpillars are a little creepy, and we see them as slimy, leaf-eating pests. And nobody's happy to see a caterpillar on their arm, are they? I mean, we usually flinch and, it's harmless, but it's just the look of it. It's just, but if a butterfly lands on you, you're special, right? And the fact of the matter is, it's just a butterfly. You ain't that special. They land everywhere. But a caterpillar is one of God's greatest illustrations of hidden potential. That is in every single one of us. See, look, there's nothing about a shepherd that tells us he's going to be king. And yet David becomes one of the greatest kings in Israel's history. Now, the only thing that stands between a caterpillar and a butterfly is the cocoon. And cocoons are amazing, aren't they? I don't know what happens inside a cocoon. I'm not a scientist, but a cocoon provides shelter and camouflage and just this place of transformation for the caterpillar to transform safely and beautifully into a butterfly. Now, some cocoons produce butterflies, and some cocoons produce dragons. You see, there's nothing about a child that tells us it's going to be a dragon. The children are happy, they're trusting, they are full of life. All they crave is attachment. But children are just the transitional form to adults. And some adults are dragons. They're not the kind of dragons that fly around, burn up cities and eat the livestock, but the kind of dragons that sabotage their own lives and burn up the lives of those around them. And the only thing that stands between a child and a dragon is the cocoon. And if that cocoon is toxic, what do you think you're going to produce? Chernobyl is one of the greatest nuclear accidents in the history of the world. I guess it's just the greatest. I mean, 30 years later, it's still radioactive. It's still spilling out radioactivity. And the thing is, if you grew up in Chernobyl, you're radioactive. And if you're radioactive, you are leaking onto the people around you. And there's a guy, there's always a guy who says, well, I grew up in Chernobyl, I'm not radioactive. Yeah, when we turn the lights out, you glow. So you are radioactive. I mean, I have a friend, he says, well, I grew up in a dysfunctional home, but I'm not dysfunctional. Really? I mean, your wife has a packed bag under the bed for 10 years. You have 3 children, and 2 of them don't speak to you, and you've alienated every friend you have. That's radioactive. But what does a toxic cocoon look like to produce a dragon? According to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, a study done on adverse childhood experience. Now, some of these statistics are startling. 1 in 5 American girls under the age of 18 has been sexually molested. 1 in 12 boys. When I first hear that, you say that can't be true. That's too high. That's skewed. It's wrong. Until I found out a number of years ago that my own mother was sexually molested by her father in the 30s. And that's just the number reported. See, that sort of cocoon produces severe damage to the body, to the soul, and the spirit, and it ripples through generations. 1 in 4 American children have been beaten to the point of marks being visible. That's not discipline. That's abuse. See, we're not called to shame and humiliate our children. We're called to shepherd them. And the shepherd is given a rod and a staff to direct, correct, and protect the child, not beat him. I mean, supposing you gave me your sheep to shepherd, and I took them out into the field, and I come back, and they're all beaten up, and their eyes are hanging out, and they're bloody, and they're limping, and they're running around all dysfunctional. Are you going to pay me? You're going to hang me. But in Psalm 23, it says, thy rod and thy staff comfort me. Because God directs, corrects, and protects us. And we feel safety and comfort in godly discipline because it's delivered with consistency and compassion. Otherwise, you're just producing beat-up sheep. 1 in 3 couples in America engage in physical violence. 1/4 of us have been raised with alcoholic or addicted caregivers. Now, my home growing up was never safe. It was never calm. It was always chaotic and unpredictable. We lived in a constant state of fight, flight, or freeze because of my father's drinking. Let me explain what that is. So supposing you're out on a walk in the woods and you come upon a bear who's very aggressive. God has put into us a survival technique of fight, flight, or freeze. So you have 3 options. You can fight the bear. Some people choose that option, and we call them dead. You can run from the bear, and the only old thing is you can't outrun a bear. I don't have to outrun the bear. I just got to outrun you. The bear will take care of you. Or you can freeze. Now, Jim Gaffigan, the comedian, he talks about when he went camping with his friends, they gave him a brochure in the campsite and said, if you come upon an aggressive bear, play dead. And Gaffigan says, who wrote that? The bear? That's not going to work. But once we get out of the danger of the bear, our body returns to a normal state. But in that state of fight, flight, or freeze, the physical effects, our heart beats faster and harder. Our bladder relaxes. Our pupils dilate. We get tunnel vision. Our blood pressure increases. The production of tears and saliva decreases. Cotton mouth. Our hearing diminishes. Our muscles tense. Blood decreases to our hands and feet. That's what they call cold feet. Our blood sugar spikes. The executive part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, shuts down so we can't make good decisions, and our immune system shuts down. But like I said, once we get out of away from the bear, we go back to normal again. Has anybody ever felt this? Fight, flight, or freeze? Some of you are feeling it now. But listen, imagine the bear comes home every night. And you marinate in that anxiety every day, wallowing for years in stress hormones, a toxic cocktail that affects our immune system. It affects the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we behave. The Bible says that anxiety in the heart of a man weighs him down. How far down? If you read what stress and anxiety do to the body, it is scary. 1 in 8 American children has witnessed their mother being abused, either physically, verbally, or by abandonment. Now, King Solomon says in Proverbs 4, guard your heart with all of diligence, for out of it flows the spring of life. But if that wellspring is foul, what do you think you're going to grow? See, our subconscious mind has tremendous power in our day-to-day reality. That's why Solomon says, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. Think about what you're thinking. Now, there are 4 basic modes of thinking that sabotage our lives, and they're all learned in the early years of our lives. See if you recognize any of these operating in your life or in your friend's life. Everybody says, well, not my life, but his life. I can see it in his. First one is perfectionism. The next one is control, all or nothing thinking, or the critical inner parent. These modes of thinking become so powerful in our lives that we become neurochemically addicted to them. And because we are addicted to these modes of thinking, we become magnets for chaos. I mean, you ever know anybody who you just say, there's just always chaos around them because they're addicted to it. And we become addicted to that chaos and the dysfunction in our lives and what this thinking creates. But it takes tremendous trust in God to change. Because significant breakthroughs in life are always preceded by courageous breaks with our way of thinking. First one is perfectionism. So if I can be perfect, Mom will love me. If I can be perfect, Dad will stop drinking. If I can be perfect, Mom and Dad will get back together. Now, of course, this is a recipe for disaster, isn't it? Because there are no perfect marriages. There are no perfect children. Nothing's perfect. People who live in this mode of thinking have trouble distinguishing from mistakes that they make and who they are, because then they feel that they are a mistake. But nothing's perfect. In 1956, Don Larson for the Yankees pitched the perfect game in the World Series. The only perfect game that's ever been pitched. And that means nobody got on base. There were no hits, there were no walks, there were no errors. Nobody got on base. But the game was far from perfect. You see, it took Larson 100 pitches to complete the game. A perfect game would be 27 pitches, right? 27 people up, 27 people down, and you're done. Or 81 pitches if you threw all strikes. But there is a guy in North Jersey, I don't know if he's alive anymore, but there is a guy in North Jersey who was tortured by this game. And he says, I've watched this game dozens of times. And Larson got the benefit of a lot of calls from the umpires. Pitches that were balls were strikes. That's a guy who's a perfectionist, isn't it? I mean, that's a guy who, like, you want to say, it was 64 years ago, bud, okay? They're not changing it. It's a perfect game. They are not changing it, especially for some guy sitting in his basement in North Jersey. I have a friend who's a great guitarist. Man, this guy is unbelievable. Sounds like Eric Clapton. He's so good, and he can hear guitar great too. He can listen and just say, wow, did you hear what he did? But he doesn't say that a lot. What he says is, did you hear that mistake? He just made a mistake. And I'll be like, I didn't hear the mistake. And then again, did you hear that mistake? He just made another mistake. And I'm like, you know what the mistake is? Sitting next to you. That's my mistake. God's not looking for perfect people. He's not. Look at Jesus' disciples. What a bunch of knuckleheads. Would you have chosen them? I would not have chosen them. But Romans chapter 3, it says, God demonstrates his love for us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. While we were yet sinners. See, our Holy Father accepts us the way we are. Perfectionist, too, requires other people to be perfect for you. If you'll be perfect, I'll love you. I never signed up for perfect, okay? So you ain't getting it with me. But here's the mercy in this. God shines brightest in our imperfections. There is this Japanese art form called kintsugi. and it's Japanese bowl art. And what these people do is they take bowls that are cracked, the imperfections, and they fill the cracks with gold so that where the bowl is cracked, where its imperfection is, it shines the brightest. And they are considered more valuable than a perfect bowl. Because what they say, pristine perfection is less beautiful than the broken. That's how God looks at us. Second mode of thinking is control. The grid of control is amazing, right? If I can control you, you won't abandon me. If I can control the circumstances, I can still look good. We control people by playing the victim. We control people by playing the martyr. We control people by enabling them. We control people with anger, with guilt. People tried to control Jesus with flattery, didn't they? Oh, we know you're such a great teacher. What do you think about this? And look, one of the strongest areas of control is religion. God's mad at you. You're a bad boy. God doesn't like bad boys. If you don't do what your mother says, you're going to go to hell. I never heard that. My mother didn't say that. But we can control people with silence too, can't we? Have you ever gotten the silent treatment? Man, that's a powerful way to control somebody. You come in, he's not talking to me. Is he in a bad mood? What did I do? I don't know. He's a jerk. He's in a bad mood. That's all. But what I've told my children is that we cannot control the circumstances in our lives. We can react or we can direct. Now, many of us have reacted most of our lives, and how's that working out? A great illustration of this is Jesus is crucified between two thieves. One of them reacts by cursing his situation and railing at Jesus. Well, if you are the king, if you are this great Lord, why don't you save yourself and us? And what you want to say to this guy is, look, this attitude got you where you are today, on a cross, dying. Maybe a little change might change things for you. The second thief, he takes responsibility for his consequences, and he directs, and he says to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And what does Jesus say? Today, you will be with me in paradise. By a shift in thinking, by directing instead of reacting, this convicted thief accompanies Jesus into heaven. It's an extraordinary illustration, isn't it? The question is, can we shift our way of thinking? You see, controlling behavior is always rooted in fear. But we can't control what happens, can we? We can't. We can't control, but we can control how we interpret it. In the ministry that I run here at Coastal, This One Voice, we talk about flipping the preposition from to to for. Simple flip. Now, things don't happen to us, they happen for us. The Bible says that all things work together for the good of those who love God. But not all things are good. Now, some things are horrible. A number of years ago, about 15 years ago now, I lost a baby. And people would say, well, all things work together for the good. Yeah, I know that, okay? That's not comforting. Or, God has a plan. I got a plan too. And it's a better plan than that. But that didn't happen to me, it happened for me. I don't know why I grew up in the home that I grew up in. I had no control. I didn't choose my father. I felt like God had forgotten us, that God had abandoned us. It distorted the way I felt about myself and it distorted the way I felt about God. You see, now I realize that God did it for me. Because out of that, the ministry, This One Voice, was born.
Amen.
Thank you. So whatever you go through, get the lesson. Don't miss the lesson. Don't waste the opportunity to grow. You've already paid the tuition. You might as well get the lesson. Because out of that history, again, I said, This One Voice was born. And through that ministry, God is blessing people right here at Coastal. And now we have a call-in feature where people can call in and attend the meeting. It's amazing. Some guy called in for pizza one time, but he stayed for the meeting. He said, I didn't expect this. And because I've been able to switch that from 2 to 4, I get to influence my children and my grandchildren and their children and their children. So we can influence people and not control them. So ask yourself, in what area of my life do I feel the need to be controlling? The next mode of thinking, this is my favorite because this is me. It's all or nothing thinking. Now, when I first read about this, I realized this is me. And I'm really annoying. I wouldn't want to spend a lot of time with me. But if you grow up with no boundaries, you never feel safe. And so I built a wall of protection around myself, and it gave me control over my boundaries. What I believed, I believed. It was well thought out, it was researched, and it was reinforced over the years. It was ironclad. And if you didn't think the way I thought, you weren't getting in. But there's a vast difference between being decisive and being closed-minded. Proverbs 18:2 says, "A fool does not delight in understanding, but only in revealing his own mind." In all-nothing thinking, we don't seriously consider options, but only in revealing our own minds. In all-or-nothing thinking, we don't consider other opinions. You see, it's the tyranny of either or. Either you think my way or you're out. I have a friend who says, if you don't agree with me, you're my enemy. It's a little bit too far, but either you believe exactly like this or you're going to hell. The religious leaders of Jesus' day communicated to him, either you condemn the marginalized or you're a friend to sinners. Really? I asked myself, how many times did I try to prove that I was right when it really didn't even matter? A lot of times. But instead of either or, suppose we consider and. The freedom and the liberty of and. I can have an opinion, and so can you. See, the world opens up to us when we consider other perspectives, right? It's so liberating, it's so opening, and people feel valued in our presence. Everybody doesn't have to think the way I do. You should. You should. You save yourself a lot of trouble if you just think the way I do. But you don't have to. You can still be my friend. The next is the critical inner voice. Do we all know this? Have we all heard that critical inner voice? It's the voice that berates us and undermines us at every turn. It's a form of self-abandonment. You know, it says, you're not fast enough. You can't do that. You don't deserve that. You're just not smart enough. A couple of years ago, I think it was last year, my wife and I saw Russ Taff in a Cape May courthouse. He was speaking at a church. Now, you all know Russ Taff? Russ Taff is this amazing gospel singer, right? Back in the 70s and 80s, he was gigantic. He sang originally with the Imperials, and then he went out on his own. Oh, look, this guy had a great voice. He wrote great songs, and the look, he was a handsome guy, long hair. I mean, he was amazing, and he wins a Grammy Award. He says 15 minutes after he wins the Grammy Award, a voice in his head said, "What are you doing? Who do you think you are? You're nothing, you show off." It was the voice of his father who had abused him as a child. And the only way Russ found to silence that voice was through alcohol and drugs. When I was in 6th grade, my mom bought me this monkey shirt. You all remember the Monkees? We got the Monkees. I mean, come on. Anything cooler than that is just, yeah, come on, the Monkees, man. The Monkees. Hey, hey, we're the Monkees, right? People say, anybody know that song? Let's sing it. No, we won't sing it. But so my mom bought me a monkey shirt. It was double-breasted, and it was paisley. So I was like double cool. And it was, it was groovy. Remember the word groovy? Who remembers groovy? Those are old people. But it's coming back. I think groovy's coming back. It's not coming back. Neither are monkey shirts, okay? But I had a paisley monkey shirt. And the whole day, I was in 6th grade. Terence! Holy mackerel, look at that shirt! Wow, that is awesome! And at the end of the day, I was walking home from school, which was right around the block from my house. And a voice said, "What are you doing? You don't deserve to wear that shirt. You don't deserve that praise. Who do you think you are?" So I took the shirt off, and I threw it out in my neighbor's garbage, and I never wore it again. Because in this line of thinking, we're unable to distinguish between an observation and a value judgment. Here's an observation. Terence, I've heard this before. Terence, don't wash the colors with the whites. I don't know why not. I mean, if a white gets pink, I'll throw it out. It doesn't matter. I wash the colors with the whites. That's the observation. You're not supposed to do that. What I hear is you can't even do laundry. What is wrong with you? No one's going to love you. That's a leap, isn't it? But that's where our minds go to sometimes. And in 1 John chapter 3, John says, we rest assured that whenever our hearts condemn us, whenever we hear those voices, God is greater than our hearts, and He knows everything. In the ministry of this one voice, we want to replace the critical inner voice with the voice of Christ. I know a couple of weeks ago, Pastor Bob was here and he was talking about John chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery. And all the men that are there that want to stone her, and they're condemning her, and they're shaming her, and they're humiliating her. And Jesus disperses all of those voices until she's left with just one voice. The voice of Christ, who says, I don't condemn you. Go and live differently because there's a better way to live. And when we hear that voice of Christ in our lives, we're able to become the voice of Christ in the lives of others. Now, these modes of thinking are easy to see in other people, aren't they? I gave my friend a book that described these modes of thinking. I gave it to him because of him. And I said, what'd you think about the book? He said, oh, my wife is all over that, man. I see my wife in all those dysfunctional modes of thinking. And I said, it's you. And he said, well, it's a little bit of me, but her it is. If you're thinking about someone else right now, Jesus says, remove the plank from your eye before you can work on the speck in your brother's eye. That's a great illustration, isn't it? I mean, we were just walking around with these planks hanging out of our eyes. We're banging into people. We're knocking stuff down. But we're finding faults in other people. And Jesus says, remove that plank. Work on yourself first before you want to work on somebody else. Now, a butterfly can't decide that it doesn't like its wings. I'm not all that happy with these wings that I got here. It can't go back into the cocoon and change. But an adult that's become a dragon can. It's a lot of work, and you have to want to change. And some people say, hey, look, I'm the way I am. You got to live with me. I'm not changing. That's one of the greatest skills in the world, isn't it? Let's just have a parade for that guy. You ain't changing. But Peter Scazzaro, in his book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, says that one of the symptoms of emotionally unhealthy spirituality is denying the past's impact on the present and being unwilling to change. See, our childhood messages become our path. But we don't have to remain on that path. And here's the thing about this one voice. It's not about complaining or blaming. It's just the way it is. The fact is, the more work I did on myself, the more compassion I had for my dad. Because my dad grew up in an incredibly dysfunctional home. And what he went through. The greatest influence on what we're going to grow in our lives, it's not going to be the circumstances, but rather what and how we think. Because the way we think is the wellspring of our lives. Solomon says, the wisdom of the prudent is to give thought to their ways, but the folly of fools is deception. Look, if all of this that I'm talking about resembles the home that you grew up in, and pat yourself on the back, you survived. You figured out a way to survive. Because nobody, and not everybody, survives. My brother Andrew, my oldest brother, he was my protector. He was my influence when I was young. When things were going crazy, he'd say, it'll be all right. I'm here. I'll take care of you. It'll be okay. He didn't make it. He died by suicide. And second of all, if this describes the home that you grew up in, it's going to manifest. It just is. I mean, that's the truth. It's going to manifest in these modes of thinking. It's going to manifest in the way you think. It's going to manifest in how your emotions work, and it's going to manifest in how you behave. Now, God delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, but that generation, they didn't enter the promised land. Why not? Because they still had the Egyptian slave mentality. See, Miles Monroe, in his book, Burden of Freedom. What's the burden of freedom? It's responsibility. And he says, without mental transformation, the actions we take to change may only produce a new place where we continue to do our old things. Listen to that. Without mental transformation, the actions we take to change may only produce a new place where we continue to do our old things. The Israelites no longer had the chains on, but they lived as if they did have the chains on. Remember I said anxiety in the heart of a person weighs it down from Proverbs 12. The second half is, but a good word makes it glad. What's the good word? Look, I can't change my ancestors, but I can influence my descendants. When I was baptized in the summer of 1978, the man who baptized me, Mr. King, in his pool in Los Angeles, he said to me, Terence, you just changed your family tree because you've introduced eternity into your family. It's all different now. I was like, I didn't know what he was talking about. I was 22 years old, and just a month earlier, I was smoking pot. So I don't, okay, great, the family tree has changed. I don't know what you're talking about. Just, can we get out of the pool now? Can we? But in his book, The Infinite Game, business leader Simon Sinek says, we need to distinguish whether we're playing in a finite or an infinite game. So games like football, baseball, etc., they're finite games. Like the Packers last week. It was a very finite game. In the first 10 minutes, it was over. And I got to leave. They finish, they go home, and it goes into the books. We're in an infinite game. It doesn't end when the casket closes. Our influence ripples on for generations. It could be a good influence, or it could be a bad influence. Sarah grows in her song, Generations. She says, generations will reap what I sow. I love that. I can sow good or I can sow bad, but that is the good word, generations. My son's son's son will say thank you. Now, when the worship team comes up, they're going to play a song. I asked Dawson to play a song for me that kind of went along with the message about fear. And I've been doing a radio show in Ocean County for 25 years, every Saturday morning. And people call in every week. Could you play, I have a request. Could you play? And I always, yeah, sure, I'll play it. And then when I hang up, I'm not playing that. It's your own show. It's my show. This is not Joe from Orchid River's show. But Dawson's a good guy. He's not like that. No, he is. He said, you know what? I'll play the song, yeah. Now, I did threaten to smash his guitar, but I don't think that was the motivation. And I would hope that this song, No Longer a Slave to Fear, will become an anthem for all of us this year, 2020. And it's been such a comfort for me. I'm no longer a slave to fear. Now, I will read for you from one of my favorite songs, Augustine's Lament. And the words are, it's the fear of moving onward. It's the fear of looking back. It's the fear that we might go unnoticed and just slip between the cracks. It's the fear of contradiction. It's the fear of losing face. It's the fear of fear itself. It's the burden of our race. My soul is restless. My soul is restless. My soul is restless till I find rest in thee. The message of this one voice is the same message that Jesus gave the woman caught in adultery. I don't condemn you, and there's a better way to live.
As a church, we believe it is our responsibility to connect our community to Christ. So, if you found this message helpful, we'd like to invite you to share it with your family and friends. We'll see you next week.